Howdy. Are we good this time? No sneaky gastric ghosts? No rifts in time itself to stop me? I can finally talk about it? Cool. Let me take you back to when I first played Chapter 2. I was going through this puzzle and so far, everything was about what I was expecting. The Queen's face in the Queen's mansion? Checks out. Some diamonds and triangles that make a bigger triangle? It's kind of giving me Steven Universe flashbacks, but whatever. I see what this puzzle is doing, and it checks out. Then I get to the third puzzle and that's not abstract shapes or the face of the puzzle's owner. That looks like a story. Blue, yellow, purple, green, orange. Okay, so that's Chris or Birdly, Susie, Noelle, Ralsei, and a named fifth character? How do these shapes relate to the characters? Susie and houses. Susie doesn't bring much to mind yet. We haven't even seen her house. Noelle and fire. That doesn't make sense either. Noelle's element is ice. In fact, at this point, other than Birdly, none of this seems to go together at all. Am I overthinking it? Maybe I should stop.
Just relax in your mind palace, which probably doesn't even have anything in it. I just need to figure out why the shapes don't go together.
Toby? Toby, look at me. Is that a challenge? This is foreshadowing, isn't it? Yes, I see your cheeky plays, I see what you're doing. And I am onto you. I may not have had the pieces I needed to fill in the blanks when I first saw this, but do you know what I've been through since then? I helped tease out the nuances of the word root. I dove into the code and discovered Spamton's element is that of a cat. I learned about Chris's connection to the ocean, and about the song coming from the sea. I have been going over this game with such a fine-tooth comb. I've been playing it in Japanese, and I am finally starting to have what I need to begin to piece together this puzzle. And if I have done my job properly, maybe now you do too. So join me, won't you? On this Deltarune deep dive? Darkness dive? Roll the thing. First, some quick disclaimers. Don't hassle people about the text-to-speech, just in general. People shouldn't have to defend their decisions regarding what makes them comfortable while interacting with others online. This channel is about all the fun ways we can fit the pieces together, not to craft the one perfect theory. It's fine to disagree. In fact, it's welcome. I'll love to see all the things I missed, or all the other ways we can look at things. So if you see a theory you think is ridiculous, please don't get so caught in this need to be right that you started acting rude to each other. Basically, don't be a Birdly. Finally, spoiler warnings for Undertale and Deltarune. If you haven't played them, go do that first. Right, so, when I'm trying to untangle a challenging puzzle, I usually start with the easiest part first, because often those pieces give hints about how to solve the harder parts. So let's start with the Bluebird. I know what you're thinking. It's a picture of Birdly. What else is there to say? But Birdly actually uses the phrase Bluebird several times in this game, and when he does, he actually seems to be setting it up as a metaphor. Right here, when he tells us his backstory, he begins with, "I used to be a forgettable little bluebird. No one even remembered my name." But then he tells us about how he won the spelling bee, and that achievement elevated him to a place of importance. It changed him from forgettable and insignificant to the smart kid. Sound familiar? It's not just me either. Birdly actually calls Chris a fellow bluebird here, right before you go to fight Queen. At the time I thought he was just referencing the fact that they share the color blue. But remember Chris's room? It's completely barren of any trophies or achievements, and it's placed in direct contrast to his brother's side, which is absolutely bursting with trophies and awards. We know this is something that Chris feels deeply about too, because when Ralsei makes them a room in the Dark World, he actually makes them trophies and awards to hang over their bed. So using this piece right here, we can make a few guesses about the rest of the dark bulb shadows. Number 1, we can use the color of the shadows to guess which characters they relate to. Number 2, shadows can have more than one character they apply to. And number 3, the shape of the shadows hints at what that character is hiding or ashamed of. Alright, So keeping that in mind, let's look at this purple one. Purple is most likely a reference to Susie. The game is pretty overt about calling her the purple girl or the purple one at pretty much every opportunity it gets. But why a house? Well, to begin with, I don't think this is a generic house. I think this is actually representative of Susie's home. We haven't seen her house yet, but we do know she doesn't have a lot of friends and hasn't had a sleepover in a very long time. Also, although she does walk Chris home, she doesn't seem too eager to bring Chris to her house, even if you wander all over town looking for it. However, I think there is more to this than just her being shy about her home, and I'm not the only one. The two main theories regarding Susie seem to be either that she's homeless, or that she doesn't feel safe at home. A few obvious examples of this are this cutscene here, in which Susie seems to be avoiding calling her family to let them know that she's sleeping over with Chris, and the many times the game implies she's not being properly fed. In Chapter 1, she mentions that she didn't have breakfast and that's why she was stealing and eating chalk. When Ralse makes her room, and Susie lists off foods she's used to eating, she includes pine cones, chalk, moss, pieces of ice, and black crumbs from the toaster, the last of which sounds like it's painting a really sad image of like a hungry little kid shaking the toaster trying to eat the burnt crumbs. I know she's a monster and they can have weird diets, but even so, she mentions several times that she's always hungry and looking for food, even drinking the milk she finds in a random alleyway by a dumpster. Of the two, I personally lean toward her feeling unsafe in her home. Being constantly hungry is a pretty common problem from homelessness, of course, but it can also be the result of parents not providing their child with enough food. It can occur when a child fears they will be punished if they try to sneak a snack, and it can be another side effect of fear, since fight or flight can repress your appetite, and if you feel your parents are hostile, you might feel unwilling to risk encountering them on the way to the kitchen. Susie drops a lot of hints in the dialogue to this effect as well, specifically when we fight K round and Ralse asks why she kept attacking it even though it was making the enemy stronger. Susie says, "And let it think I'm afraid," implying that she's become accustomed to hiding vulnerability and putting on an aggressive front as a defense mechanism. In the school, when you catch her eating chalk, she tells us directly that she feels as if everyone is looking forward to her being expelled. And when she receives praise from Lancer for the first time, she appears to be genuinely surprised, almost like it's never happened to her before, and she's not quite sure how to respond. While you can shrug a lot of this off as Susie experiencing bullying from her peers, I find her reaction to meeting Chris's mother to be particularly telling. We've seen her behavior around other authority figures, including Alfie's, Rudy, Father Alvin, and Lancer's dad, and in general her response appears to be either rude or avoidant. But with Toriel we see a very different side of Susie, and it seems to go beyond simple politeness. Look how tense she is. Her eyes are on the ceiling, her back is perfectly straight, and her walk cycle is so stiff it almost looks like her knees are full of cement. She's very quick to correct herself whenever it seems like she might be starting to step out of line, and it's very clear she's expecting Toriel to blow up at her at any moment. But hey, Toriel is a pretty scary person. Maybe Susie just had Toriel as a teacher? Well, maybe, but I don't think so. She seems genuinely surprised when Toriel remembers her name, which would be very odd if she'd had Susie as a student. But I will confess, I might be a bit biased here. I've had a friend who responded this way to meeting my mom, and it did not foreshadow good things about their home. That said, I do feel compelled to point out that it is possible that Susie's perspective of her family is distorted. This sort of trope is fairly common in fiction. I still remember how surprised I was when I finally met Asgore, after Toriel and Undine built him up as a ruthless murderer. But regardless of if Susie is avoiding her home, or actively homeless, she certainly seems touched by the home Ralse has made for her in his castle, and I can't help but wonder what she's thinking of here when she says, "My own room, like this." That said, if the shadows are meant to be applied to multiple characters, then Asgore and Toriel might be related to this shadow as well, since they both feature purple as a prominent part of their color scheme, and both appear to have something of a broken home that I'm sure the games will elaborate on in later chapters. After Susie, I'd say the next easiest shadow here is this yellow one, since yellow seems to be the color of Noelle. As for the shape, is this fire? That's pretty surprising given Noelle's element is ice. Although, Noel's magic does seem quite similar to Ralsei's, and given that Ralsei is a goat boy, you'd surely expect him to be using fire magic like Toriel and Asgore, right? Unless fire and ice are the same element, a sort of temperature magic if you will. The same way holy and electric make up sky magic. See the Element 6 video for a rundown on that. Alternatively, if this is meant to be related to the past, I wonder if fire relates to Des going missing? It would certainly explain Noel's preference for all things cold and ice. That said, in battle we actually see this symbol whenever any of the party members are using magic in general. So then this symbol might be hinting at the word root, foreshadowing the dark secrets of her devastating ice magic, but if that's so, it would be the only example so far to relate to an event that isn't from the character's past, given that you can't get to this room on the word root. But what if I told you that Noel has used magic like this before we ever got here? Credit to Daryl Talks Games for this theory, but basically between the shaking NPCs and the torn up landscape, it seems like Noel may have panicked when she first entered the Dark World and done quite a bit of damage in self-defense. This explains why the Queen is so set on using Noel in particular, whom she declares to be the strongest of the Lightners. The way Noel is curled up here and seems to be feeling a bit out of it also lines up with the way she behaves right after casting Snowgrave. If true, this could have some very serious implications for the normal route later, especially since Susie told her that everything happening in the Dark World is just a dream. Good thing she can't use those powers in the Light World. Haha. Unless she has used this power before, and that's why Des disappeared. Unfortunately, this is where the shadows start to become a bit of a Rorschach test. So I'm going to do my best here, but I tend to give the weird uncommon answers whenever I take one of these. So, while I am eager to hear what you guys think these two are in the comments, please be gentle. Starting with the green one, I believe the most obvious candidate for a green shadow has to be Ralsei, although because Ralsei overlaps so much with Asriel and Flowey, this shadow could be for either of them just as easily. But the real question here is, what even is this shadow? It kind of looks like Ralsei's hat zoomed way in on the top, but if that's the case, that'd make this the first shadow to show an incomplete image like this. If it does turn out to be a hat, I'm guessing the shadow is representative of Ralsei's identity. Whether he turns out to secretly be Asriel, the last boss, or even a Lightner in disguise, the game devotes quite a bit of time to discussing his desire to hide parts of himself, first under this hood, and then later under his hat. Ralsei himself calls attention to this on this boat ride with Chris, when he states that he's been hiding his face so we wouldn't see, which he then follows up by stating that he isn't sure what being Ralsei like even is. Also, as a glasses wearer myself, I hate to say this, but Ralsei also might be using his to hide his eyes from us too. This is the only time we see his eye color in the game, and it's also one of the few times he stands up to Susie when she picks on him. As normally he's so eager to please, he'll just go along with whatever we want from him, even if it seems degrading or unpleasant. He's also covering his face with his free hand, which isn't typically a useful strategy for increasing your vision. I mean, he could be trying to do that look through a pinhole strategy, but I feel like his fuzzy goat paws wouldn't be super great for that. And finally, his expression when he realizes we were behind him might just be surprise, but to me it kind of looks like he's worried about what we saw, although that's obviously just speculation on my part. But what if this shadow isn't meant to represent a hat? What if instead, it's meant to represent a wave? I've mentioned before that when Chris first wakes up in the Dark World they hear a sound that turns out to be ocean.ogg, and at the time, I theorized that this might hint at some secret in Chris's past, because of the similarities it has to this moment here in Undertale. But what if this isn't something to do with Chris, but with the place Chris has fallen into? What if Ralsei is the one singing the song coming from the sea? That's right, if you saw my last video, then you knew this was coming, but if you didn't, here's a quick summary. The main song of the game, Don't Forget, is the only song in the game with lyrics, and those lyrics seem to imply that it's being sung by one of the main characters in the game. Although it could be any number of characters, there's a lot of evidence suggesting it might be Ralsei, including his attachment to the player, this conversation he has here about the game's ending, the fact that he's somehow able to traverse between dark worlds, and a bunch of hints specific to the Japanese localization, ranging from which writing system these subtitles are written in, to which pronouns the speaker uses when referring to themselves and the listener. One piece of evidence I didn't catch was the official Deltarune stickers that depict Ralsei singing this very song, which was pointed out to me in the comments. Thank you to these people for noticing that. By the way, I didn't think to check the merch since Toby has gone on record saying these aren't related to canon. But then, this sticker here seems to be foreshadowing Snowgrave a few years in advance. So, I think it's fair to use these as support for theories, at least at this point. But even if you don't believe this song is being sung by Ralsei, Ralsei is still the only character so far to sing in this game, aside from Mettaton and Up. Okay, yeah, I do see where you guys are coming from. Shiren is pretty clearly a play on a siren. Shiren is also one of the few normal enemies that has a unique encounter. Between all of that and Toby's comment on his Tumblr, back on ye olden days, I can see why there's a lot of curiosity regarding her role in this game. But her sister is dead, and she's in the hospital, apparently having blown out her voice starting in Chapter 2. Look, even Susie is wondering what we're doing here. Shiren is green and has a connection to both singing and the sea, so I'm not saying it's impossible, but until we see her make a full recovery, or until Chris finally unlocks the secrets of necromancy, or opens up a dark world in this cemetery, I'm going to have to put this theory on the back burner and poke our other green boy. So presuming this shadow is related to Ralsei, and presuming it might be alluding to him as the singer of the song coming from the sea, what are the implications? Well, let's look at that siren angle, because I do think it's a pretty fair starting point. That's siren, not Shiren. A siren is a type of sea-dwelling creature which sings beautiful songs and creates enticing illusions to lure sailors to their deaths at sea. Ralsei does dress like the ferryman of the River Styx when we first meet him, which softly implies his intention might be to bring us to the land of the dead. And he also does create enticing illusions for us, in the form of these beautiful rooms in his castle, which are customized to our exact preferences to a very uncanny degree. They do seem to be illusionary though, as Susie complains in Chapter 1, that none of the food she eats in the dark world seems to make her feel any less hungry, which, now that I think about it, you're not supposed to eat food from the land of the dead, are you? Oops. Of course, this might not be death, since dark worlds seem to be representative of fictional narratives. Ralsei might just be trying to lure us into a normal fairy tale world. He is the lonely prince after all, whose primary goal seems to be filling his town with as many recruits as possible. But this does raise a pretty unsettling question. Why is Onion-san able to hear him? We don't know the exact mechanics quite yet, but it seems like it would be pretty difficult to create a dark world under the ocean. Aside from the logistics of stabbing into the sandy depths with a knife, isn't the deep ocean already the darkest place on Earth? Well, this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but I think it might be possible that someone might be trying to pull other Lightners into the dark world. It's way too early to tell, of course, but it does seem like something is reaching out to the characters in the overworld and trying to fill in the lonely parts of their hearts. Onion-san is the obvious example, but we also see this happening with Burger Pants, with Father Alvin, and with Snowy and Monster Kid here. It might not be Ralsei, and I still haven't found enough evidence to be sure if Chris is working for or against this plan, but that definitely seems to be the theme of Chapter 2's Light World. And Ralsei and Chris do seem to have some kind of a plan going between the two of them, so only time will tell. But I might be wrong about this. Maybe the song Onion-san heard really is just Catty and Bratty dueling ukuleles by the beach. But this wave has got to mean something, and so far, Ralsei is the best lead we have. Well, him and Asriel. Apparently Asriel has been throwing bread to Onion-san? I don't know what to make of that. But if you do, let me know. For now, let's see if we can't crack open that final and most cryptic shadow. The shadow on the bottom is orange, which isn't a color I see very often in either of these games. I mean, aside from tension points. We have Shalm, who could just as easily be purple, but for now, I think we need to try to figure out the shape before we can really untangle the color. So let's see here. All the other pieces, minus the bird, are meant to be interpreted with the flat piece against one of the corners. So let's see what we have to work with. I could see a fist, a factory, Maybe a face with a huge chin? I probably shouldn't have to Rorschach it quite this hard though, and all of those are a huge stretch. What if we rotate it like this? Okay, maybe my eyes are just kooky, but I see a boot here, pretty clearly in the outline. Here we see the tongue, the laces, and the toe, with the bottom of the boot lying flat against the ground. So a boot. Who has big poofy boots like this? You'd think Snowden with its cold would give us a lot of candidates, but in a world of fuzzy monsters and big lizards, we actually don't have that many. It could still be Shom, since we don't see his feet close up, unless you count this very blurry zoomed out version of him as a doll in the real world. Even Lancer and his dad have pretty small sleek shoes, especially compared to Jevel's slippers. Wait, is Jevel wearing slippers? Why do all these secret bosses keep kicking my butt in slippers? Undyne has boots, I suppose. In Undertale, I mean. In Deltarune she has small, sleek, black shoes. But even at her most outlandish, none of these boots really resemble this one here, not to mention she tends to be more associated with blue, green, or even red over orange. So who does that leave? Now those are some boots. They've got the laces or straps, they're big, and they're orange, the same color as Papyrus. Wait, are Papyrus's boots and cape orange, or red? I don't trust my bias brain on this one, so let's just grab some of that, save it as a PNG, upload it to this color identifier, and it's vermilion. Is vermilion considered orange or red? Oh, you know you're doomed when Google starts to auto-complete it right off the bat. Some of these call vermilion an orangish red and some a reddish orange, so this isn't very conclusive. But maybe I'm looking at this wrong. The question here isn't really if Papyrus's cape is literally orange. The question here is Papyrus symbolized by the color orange? I haven't found any statements from Toby one way or the other, but for once, we might be able to draw upon that most dark and forbidden of all scholarly sources. I am of course referring to the fandom. That's right, I'm doing this, come at me bros. Because while we should obviously be pushing back in our theory crafting when the fanon contradicts canon, I think it's a mistake to dismiss fanon interpretation entirely. Toby has shown multiple times that he's very aware of fan perceptions of his characters and actively incorporates that awareness into his stories. Sometimes he does it to mess with us, but it is still being utilized. So while we are definitely stepping into very sketchy territory here, I gotta do it. Forgive me. So, is Papyrus orange in the fanon? The short answer is yes. Yes, he is. I could point to all the fan art of it, but then we'd just be representing the most vocal or popular artists as representing the fandom. To get a solid answer, we'd have to put out a massive survey tallying the votes of dozens of players who... Oh hey look, someone already did that? Yoink. Obviously this isn't a completely comprehensive survey or anything, but 149 participants is pretty good. And unless Toby himself puts out a public survey of the question, I think this is about as much as we can hope for. So, given what we know so far, this shadow probably represents Papyrus. Probably. I mean, who knows? Maybe in Chapter 3 we're going to meet some big orange boot-wearing meme factory, or we'll find out Noelle's mother, the mayor, is actually rocking these epic orange boots, and she'll stomp out all our hopes and dreams of Papyrus ever being a significant character again. But right now, this is what we have, so this is what I'm running with. But where can we even run to? I mean, a boot is pretty vague as far as symbolism goes, right? And yeah, it is. But we've come this far, so just for funsies let's spitball. Orange in these games is typically used for bravery and for putting yourself close to danger. Papyrus has been notably missing since the game began, and Sans has been rather suspicious about it to say the least. In Chapter 1 he tells us he wants us to meet Papyrus, but then in Chapter 2 he says that plan fell through. Why? It's hard to imagine Papyrus refusing company, and Sans isn't exactly known for being a workaholic who can't spare a second to leave his workstation and unlock the door right next to his shop. Besides, if that were the concern, he could just leave it unlocked before his shift, or let us borrow the key. It wouldn't exactly be the first time. I think the reason Sans asked us to hang out with Papyrus has less to do with friendship, and more to do with getting a babysitter. I think that Papyrus might be getting involved in some kind of trouble. Shoes are often used to represent the path someone is walking, hence the expression, walk a mile in another man's shoes, and Sans himself is well known for making predictions about where a person's path is likely to lead them, and giving gentle nudges to help set them back on the correct path. I mentioned in a previous video that there's a theory floating around that Papyrus might be the knight, citing the desire to make new friends by utilizing the Dark World's power to bring inanimate objects to life. There's also this line here from Undertale, in which Papyrus says there are no skeletons in my closet, except me sometimes, which of course is a pun, since having a skeleton in your closet means you have something to hide. But you know, Deltarune provides us with a couple of closets that Papyrus could have been visiting recently, either of which would imply that he is, if not the knight outright, then at least involved in the creation of these dark worlds. Also there's the well-known line in entry 17, in which Gaster says, "What do you two think?" which is often assumed to mean Sans and Alphys, but you know, it could still be Sans and Papyrus. Haha. Please have mercy. Future me here. The you used here is actually Kimi, which would be a pretty unusual pronoun for Gaster to use if he weren't pretty close to the two people he's talking to. Just saying. Right. So then, the boot could be symbolic of him walking down this path that brings the world ever closer to destruction. Or, less charitably, it could be a boot as in something that's used to stomp out pests. Next to rolled up newspaper, I can't think of anything more commonly associated with stomping out spiders and other insignificant pests, which would bounce pretty well off some of the game's underlying themes. I hope not though. Papyrus is very wholesome in Undertale, so it'd be quite disturbing to see a no mercy version of Papyrus play out in canon. What do you think? Are these shadows secretly foreshadowing the secrets of these characters? Is Ralsei trying to lure us into the dark world permanently? Is the orange shadow Papyrus's orange boot? Or do you see something I missed in one of these shadows? Also, should longer series videos have some sort of catchy title? I can't decide if those make these easier to share or not, but if you have suggestions on that, leave those in the comments as well. And sorry for that delay. It's almost April and there's something I need to get ready for before that happens, so if you'll excuse me.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Hyperlink Blocked.